You stop at a red light without thinking. You probably have thousands of times. But who decided red means stop, green means go, and yellow means, well, whatever you decide it means in the moment, because someone did decide, and it wasn't a traffic engineer. The color system we trust with our lives every single day was borrowed from an industry that had nothing to do with cars, almost destroyed by a single catastrophic accident, and very nearly replaced by something else entirely, a system where red would have meant something completely different. The version we got was not the obvious choice. It was the survivor. To find where this actually started, you have to go back to 1830s Britain and you have to forget about cars entirely. There were no cars, the problem was trains. The British railway boom of the 1830s was unlike anything the country had experienced. Within a decade, thousands of miles of track were being laid across England, and companies were racing to connect every major city. By 1840, there were already over 1,300 miles of operational railway in Britain, and the number was climbing fast. The trouble was that nobody had figured out how to keep two trains from occupying the same stretch of track at the same time. Collisions were happening. They were deadly and they were public, and the railway companies needed a solution that every driver, called an engine driver, could understand instantly at speed from a distance. The answer they reached for was color, specifically the colors that railway signal operators were already using with handheld lanterns and flag systems borrowed from maritime tradition. Red had meant danger at sea for centuries. The association was old enough that most historians can't pin a single origin to it, but by the time British railways needed a color language, red for stop was already intuitive to the people making the decision. Green in the earliest railway systems did not mean go, it meant caution. White, a clear, unobstructed lamp, meant the line was safe to proceed. This is the first version of the system. Red for danger, green for caution, white for all clear. It worked mostly, but it contained a flaw that was invisible until it killed people. The flaw was this: a red lens, if it fell out of a signal lamp or cracked or simply wasn't replaced, left behind a clear, unfiltered white light, and white meant proceed. In 1876, a railway accident in the United States, at a section of track near Revere, Massachusetts, was attributed in part to exactly this kind of signal misreading. But the disaster that actually forced the change came from Britain's own rail network, in a long series of incidents serious enough that railway engineers began lobbying for a rethink. The solution the British railway industry landed on, gradually through the 1870s and finalized in practice by the 1890s, was to replace white for proceed with green for proceed and to move caution to yellow, a color that had been borrowed again from maritime flags, where yellow had long signaled a ship in quarantine, a vessel to approach carefully. Now the palette was complete. Red for stop, yellow for caution, green for go. The logic was risk-based. If any lens failed, the resulting white light was no longer a valid signal at all. A driver seeing uncolored light would know something was wrong rather than proceeding through what was, in fact, a broken signal. The system was solid for trains, but it was about to be handed to a completely different problem by people who didn't fully understand why the colors had been chosen in the first place. The first electric traffic light installed to manage road vehicles appeared in Cleveland, Ohio, in August 1914. It was designed by James Hodge and installed by the American Traffic Signal Company at the corner of 105th Street and Euclid Avenue. It had two colors, red and green. No yellow. The officer in a booth nearby would throw a switch manually and ring a buzzer to warn drivers the light was about to change. The yellow interval in this version was a human being. That worked in Cleveland, where traffic was manageable and the intersection was supervised. The question was whether it could scale, and whether the colors themselves would hold up when drivers were operating without a buzzer, without a booth, without any warning at all. The person who actually locked in the three-color automatic traffic light as a functional standard was a man named Garrett Morgan. In 1923, Morgan, a black inventor and entrepreneur from Cleveland, patented a T-shaped traffic signal that introduced an automated third position, a brief all-stop interval that held traffic in every direction before the light changed. This wasn't exactly yellow as we know it today, but it was the functional ancestor of the yellow phase, a mechanical pause built into the system to prevent the chaos of a simultaneous transition. Morgan sold the patent to General Electric for $40,000. GE had the manufacturing scale to deploy the design widely, and by the mid-1920s the automatic three-phase signal was spreading across American cities. But the colors still weren't formally standardized. Different cities and different manufacturers used slightly different shades, slightly different timing, occasionally different arrangements of the lights themselves. The lock-in came in 1935 when the Federal Highway Administration, then operating under a different name but with the same mandate, issued the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. The MUTCD, as it became known, codified exactly what the colors meant and critically the vertical order in which they had to appear: red on top, green on bottom, yellow in the middle. The reason for the fixed order was practical and important. A small percentage of drivers were red-green colorblind, and for those drivers, the position of the light carried the meaning, not just the color. Standardizing the position was a quiet act of accessibility baked into infrastructure. From 1935 onward, any traffic signal built to federal standard in the United States followed that template. Other countries, as car culture spread globally through the mid-20th century, converged on the same palette, most adopting the red-yellow-green system through their own national standards bodies, many explicitly referencing the American and British precedents. There was another system, and for a window of time in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it had a real argument. Some traffic theorists and early road engineers in Europe, particularly in France and Germany in the 1900s and 1910s, proposed organizing road signals around position and shape rather than color. The logic was sound. Shapes don't depend on lighting conditions the way colors do. They don't fade in fog or wash out in bright sun, and they're fully accessible to anyone with color vision deficiency. A circle, a triangle, a square each assigned a fixed meaning, readable at any time of day under any conditions. France in particular experimented with shape-based road signage as part of its early 20th century highway standardization efforts, and the shape-based approach survived in European road signs for non-light signals, the triangle for warning, the circle for regulatory instruction, for exactly these reasons. But for the light signals themselves, shape lost for a specific reason: manufacturing. In the 1910s and 1920s, projecting a sharp, recognizable shape in light required significantly more complex and expensive optical engineering than projecting a colored circle. A colored lens over a standard lamp was cheap to produce at scale. A shape-projecting signal was not. And once the colored light standard achieved mass deployment through GE and the other large American manufacturers in the 1920s, the cost advantage compounded. Replacing a deployed infrastructure with a shape-based alternative would have required replacing every signal already installed. The economics sealed the outcome. The shape system didn't disappear entirely. It migrated into the static road sign vocabulary where it still lives today. But for the lights themselves, color won not because it was theoretically superior, but because it got there first with a price point nobody could argue with. So here is what you are actually looking at the next time you sit at a red light. The red comes from maritime tradition, borrowed by British railway engineers in the 1830s because sailors had already agreed on it. The green comes from a safety redesign triggered by lenses falling out of signal lamps in the 1870s and 1880s, because the original green caution was swapped to solve an engineering failure, not because green ever intuitively meant go. The yellow phase exists because a Cleveland inventor in 1923 recognized that an automated system needed a mechanical moment of uncertainty built into it, a gap where nothing was permitted, because the alternative was two streams of traffic trusting a simultaneous transition. In the vertical order, red on top always is there because in 1935, someone writing a federal manual understood that color alone wasn't enough, and that the position of a light had to carry meaning independent of its hue. None of those decisions were made together. None of them were made by the same people for the same reasons in the same century. They accumulated, each one solving the problem that the previous version had left unresolved, until the composite looked so inevitable that it stopped being visible at all. The light turns green, you go, you don't think about any of this. And that is exactly what a good standard feels like: frictionless enough to forget, durable enough to outlast everyone who built it.